The U.S. economy is no longer in a routine phase of growth or recovery. By every measurable metric, debt levels, fiscal imbalance, monetary expansion, and structural obligations, it has entered what I call Stage 6 of the debt cycle. Stage 6 is the late stage. It is a point of extreme vulnerability. Obligations are overwhelming. Interest payments consume budgets. Currency credibility is stressed. Policy tools are stretched thin. The system is moving toward adjustment. Most observers mistake short-term market stability for safety. They look at equity indexes, employment numbers, or consumer sentiment and conclude that all is well. That is a dangerous assumption. Stage 6 is not defined by market noise, it is defined by structural mechanics. Debt, deficits, and obligations dictate outcomes, not headlines. The math does not lie. When the obligations of a system outstrip its capacity to service them, resolution is inevitable, and it rarely favors those holding assets that depend on stability. Stage 6 is characterized by forced adjustments. Governments cannot continue to borrow indefinitely without consequences. They cannot maintain low interest rates without creating hidden costs. They cannot sustain fiscal promises without either taxing heavily or devaluing the currency. The system resolves itself through redistribution of wealth, devaluation of currency, and repricing of assets. It is not speculative. It is structural. Those who ignore this fact are exposing themselves to predictable losses. The mechanics are clear. The U.S. has accumulated unprecedented debt relative to GDP. Social programs, entitlement obligations, and fiscal commitments now consume a disproportionate share of revenue. Interest costs are rising, and monetary policy is constrained. Inflation pressures, both visible and hidden, erode real value. In combination, these factors define Stage 6. Every major economy that reached this point experienced asset repricing, currency stress, and capital shifts. The U.S. is following the same historical pattern. Most people are blind to what this means. They continue to hold assets that appear secure, long-term bonds, high-valued equities, and cash. In Stage 6, these are precisely the assets most exposed to systemic adjustment. Bonds suffer from rising rates or inflation. Equities are repriced as future growth expectations decline. Cash is quietly eroded by policy and currency devaluation. The math is simple. Wealth is not destroyed, it is transferred. Those holding fragile claims provide the capital for those positioned with resilient, uncorrelated, or tangible assets. Stage 6 also brings political and social stress. Internal divisions intensify. Policy decisions are reactive rather than proactive. The system prioritizes survival over individual asset preservation. The combination of economic, fiscal, and social stress makes Stage 6 unlike prior cycles. Timing accelerates, adjustments occur more abruptly, and the cost of staying exposed increases dramatically. For anyone with significant capital, the principle is not speculation, it is recognition. The system is at a stage where defensive positioning is required. It is not about chasing short-term market signals or waiting for confirmation. Stage 6 is visible, measurable, and inevitable. Understanding this stage and aligning capital accordingly is the difference between preserving wealth and becoming a passive contributor to redistribution. Stage 6 is not abstract. It has very real consequences for asset allocation. The critical principle is simple. Assets that rely entirely on system stability are exposed. Bonds, especially long-term government bonds, are extremely vulnerable. Interest rates, even modest increases, reduce the real value of fixed income claims, while inflation erodes purchasing power quietly but continuously. Holding these assets in Stage 6 is equivalent to holding claims on a system under extreme pressure. Equities are also at risk, particularly those priced for growth in a system that is no longer stable. Stocks are not inherently safe, they are claims on future cash flows, and when policy shifts, debt burdens rise, or consumer spending declines, those expectations are repriced rapidly. Even blue-chip companies are not immune. Valuations that ignore structural realities are fragile. The system's adjustment will affect sectors differently, but concentrated exposure is dangerous. Cash, which feels safe to most, is quietly eroded by policy. Stage 6 often involves monetary accommodation that reduces real value. Governments may tolerate inflation, quietly expand the money supply, or implement indirect financial repression to reduce liabilities. The nominal number in your account may remain constant, but purchasing power declines. Historically, almost every major currency in late-stage debt cycles lost significant value relative to tangible assets. So, where should capital be positioned? The answer is not speculative, it is structural. Diversification across uncorrelated assets is essential. Real assets such as property, infrastructure, or productive businesses provide value that is independent of currency risk. Commodities retain purchasing power during currency devaluation. Gold, as a tangible store of value with no counterparty risk, has consistently preserved wealth across centuries. Holding a portion of capital in these assets reduces systemic exposure and aligns with historical principles of preservation. Stage 6 is not a time for reaction. It is a time for alignment with principles. The all-weather approach is relevant. Multiple independent streams of value reduce the impact of system-wide adjustment. The objective is not to maximize returns in a single year or chase short-term gains. The objective is to preserve wealth across the inevitable adjustment of a late-stage cycle. Another critical consideration is timing. Many participants wait for confirmation before acting, but the system does not wait. The adjustment begins quietly, accelerates, and often surprises those who depend on apparent stability. The window for repositioning narrows as the system moves through stage 6. Acting early is not about prediction. It is about following structural principles, aligning capital with mechanics, and reducing exposure to assets most at risk. Understanding which assets are vulnerable and which provide structural resilience is the difference between being a passive participant in the adjustment and actively preserving capital. Stage 6 is measurable, observable, and unavoidable. By recognizing the system's mechanics and positioning accordingly, one can mitigate risk and avoid being forced into reactive decisions. Stage 6 is not a warning, it is a structural reality. The system has reached a point where obligations, debt, and policy constraints converge to create an environment of heightened risk. The mechanics are impartial and inevitable. Wealth is not destroyed, it is redistributed. Those holding fragile, system-dependent assets provide the capital that is absorbed by those positioned with resilient, uncorrelated, or tangible assets. Understanding this process is the foundation of survival. A principle that guides action in stage 6 is simple: align capital with structural mechanics, not with hope, emotion, or short-term forecasts. Bonds and cash are exposed. Equities are vulnerable to repricing. Nominal values do not protect against real losses. In contrast, real assets, commodities, productive businesses, and gold operate outside the liabilities of the system. They preserve value even when the system adjusts. This is not speculation, it is historical fact. Diversification is critical. Holding multiple independent streams of value reduces the impact of systemic adjustment. 15 to 20 uncorrelated positions are sufficient to materially reduce risk without sacrificing long-term preservation. This approach is principle-driven, not reactive. Stage 6 is a time to act according to structural logic, not emotional impulses. The objective is long-term stability, not short-term gains. Timing is equally important. Most individuals wait for signals of crisis, market collapses, inflation spikes, or headline turmoil. By then, the adjustment is already underway. Options are limited and losses are amplified. Those who act early before the signals are obvious preserve purchasing power and reduce exposure to system-wide shocks. This is why understanding stage 6 is more than academic. It is actionable. Preparation today is protection tomorrow. Another factor to consider is political and social pressure. Stage 6 often coincides with increased internal conflict. Governments and institutions are reactive, constrained, and under scrutiny. Policy decisions are guided by survival rather than optimal economic outcomes. Individuals who align their capital with structural principles reduce exposure to these unpredictable interventions. Real, tangible, and uncorrelated assets remain effective even when policy is reactive. Finally, discipline is the ultimate principle. Stage 6 is a test of patience, preparation, and adherence to timeless mechanics. The system will not pause, and it will not reward hope. Survival is determined by early recognition, structural alignment, and maintaining positions according to principle rather than emotion. Those who wait for certainty or reassurance are forced to act under pressure, often at the worst possible moment. Those who act early, guided by history and logic, preserve wealth and minimize systemic risk. In conclusion, stage 6 is here. The system has reached its limits. Debt, obligations, and policy constraints dictate inevitable adjustment. To survive, one must recognize which assets are vulnerable, allocate to real and uncorrelated positions, diversify strategically, and act early according to principle. The mechanics are clear. The outcome is measurable. Wealth will shift, and those who prepare will preserve value. Those who wait will provide it to others. The choice is structural, unavoidable, and determined by adherence to the rules of Stage 6.